I'm Samantha Mitchell, 32 years old. My life shattered the day I discovered my sister Allison was sleeping with Brian, my husband of 6 years. What hurt even more was learning my parents helped cover it up when she got pregnant. They told me to forgive and forget for the family's sake. For months, I felt powerless, until I received that baby shower invitation. Little did they know, it would be my perfect opportunity to reclaim my dignity and my future. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family who betrayed your trust. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Growing up in Brookline, a cozy suburb of Boston, there was always an unspoken hierarchy in the Mitchell family. I was the firstborn, the responsible one, while my sister Allison, 4 years younger, was the golden child who could do no wrong. Our modest split-level home on Maple Street became the stage for this dynamic that would define our relationship well into adulthood. From an early age, our roles were clearly defined. When Allison broke Mom's favorite vase at age 7, I was questioned for not watching her properly. When she failed algebra in ninth grade, I was expected to tutor her despite my own heavy course load. When she crashed Dad's car at 16 after taking it without permission, somehow the conversation turned to how I should have been a better influence. The pattern was consistent and exhausting. "Sammy, you know your sister looks up to you," my mother would say, her tone suggesting I had failed some unwritten test of sisterhood. "She's just more sensitive than you are. You've always been so independent." Independent wasn't the word I would have chosen. Overlooked fit better. While Allison received elaborate birthday parties and the newest clothes, I learned to be content with less attention and practical gifts. My accomplishments, honor roll, debate team captain, scholarship to Boston University received polite acknowledgement, while Allison's smallest achievements warranted celebration dinners and effusive praise. I met Brian during my junior year of college. He was studying marketing while I pursued elementary education. With his warm brown eyes and genuine laugh, he saw me in a way my family never had. On our third date, he asked why I seemed surprised when he remembered details about my day. "My family doesn't really notice things about me," I admitted, immediately regretting my vulnerability. But instead of changing the subject, Brian reached for my hand. "Then they're missing out on someone pretty amazing," he said simply. We married 2 years after graduation, once we'd both secured stable jobs, Brian at a marketing firm downtown, and me at Westridge Elementary School teaching third grade. Our wedding was modest but lovely, though even then, my parents found ways to make it partially about Allison. She had just broken up with her boyfriend, so they insisted on her giving an unplanned speech to lift her spirits. She ended up talking mostly about herself and making an awkward joke about stealing Brian if I didn't treat him right. Everyone laughed. I pretended to. The first 4 years of our marriage were happy ones. We bought a small but charming colonial-style house in a neighboring suburb, spent weekends hiking the New England trails or exploring Boston's restaurants, and began planning for a family. Brian was attentive and kind, calling me every day at lunch just to check in. I thought I had finally created the stable, loving environment I'd always craved. Then came the fertility struggles. Month after month of disappointment, followed by tests, treatments, and tears. The hormones made me emotional and tired. The scheduled intimacy turned what had been passionate into something clinical. Brian remained supportive, holding me through countless nights of crying, but I sensed his growing frustration that matched my own. During this time, Allison was going through one of her rough patches. At 28, she still hadn't found a career that fulfilled her potential, my parents' words. She had cycled through 6 jobs in 3 years, from real estate to event planning to interior design, quitting each time something became too challenging or a supervisor gave critical feedback. She had also been evicted from her apartment after repeatedly paying rent late, so she was temporarily staying with our parents. But their house was being renovated, making it too stressful for her to stay there full time. This led to Allison spending 3 or 4 nights a week at our house, usually arriving unannounced with takeout food and wine, expecting to be entertained. "I just need sister time," she would say, though most of that time was spent scrolling through her phone while I graded papers or prepared for fertility appointments. On the nights I had hormone injections or was simply too exhausted for company, Brian would tell me to rest while he kept Allison company downstairs. I was grateful for his understanding and never thought twice about it. After all, they had known each other for years. They were family. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle shifts. How Allison started dressing more carefully for these impromptu visits, how she would casually touch Brian's arm during conversations, how their inside jokes seemed to multiply. But I was so consumed with our fertility journey, so focused on the family we were trying to create, that I missed the warning signs of trouble in the family we already had. I never imagined that the sister I had spent my life accommodating and the husband who had finally made me feel seen would conspire to deliver the most devastating betrayal of all, or that my parents, once again, would find a way to make excuses for Allison at my expense. The morning I discovered the affair remains crystal clear in my memory, each moment preserved in the amber of trauma. It was a Sunday in April, unseasonably warm. Brian was in the shower, and I was stripping the bed sheets when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I would never check his messages, but something about the repeated notifications caught my attention. The preview on the screen read, "Miss you already. Last night was." My stomach dropped as I picked up the phone. There was no passcode. We had always trusted each other completely. The message was from Allison, and as I scrolled up, the full picture emerged in vivid, nauseating detail. Explicit texts, plans for meetups when I would be at fertility appointments, references to times they had been together in our home in our bed while I was at work or visiting friends. "What are you doing?" Brian's voice came from the bathroom doorway. He stood there in just a towel, water still dripping from his hair. The familiar sight now foreign, contaminated. "How long?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady as I held up the phone. He tried denial first, a reflexive. "It's not what you think," but as I started reading messages aloud, his face crumpled. He sat heavily on the bed, our bed, the scene of their betrayal. "4 months," he finally admitted. "It started during your second round of hormone treatments. You were so distant, so focused on the baby thing." "The baby thing?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean our future? The family we both said we wanted?" The conversation that followed was a blur of excuses and accusations. Brian claimed he'd felt neglected during the fertility treatments, that Allison had been there to listen when he felt ignored. He swore it had been a mistake, that he wanted to end it but didn't know how. "I still love you, Sam," he said, reaching for my hand. "We can fix this." I recoiled from his touch. "Is there anything else I should know?" His hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. "Allison is pregnant." The room seemed to tilt around me. All those months of trying for a baby, all those negative tests and doctor visits, all that hope and disappointment, and now my sister was carrying my husband's child. I ordered Brian out of the house, throwing his clothes into hastily filled garbage bags, while he pleaded and apologized. When he finally left, I collapsed on the kitchen floor, violent sobs racking my body until my throat was raw. The phone call from Allison came that evening. I had ignored her dozen previous calls and texts, but something made me answer the 13th. "Sammy, we need to talk." Her voice was soft, almost childlike, the tone she always used when in trouble. "There's nothing to say," I replied flatly. "I'm pregnant," she stated, as though I might congratulate her. When I remained silent, she continued, "I know you're upset, but this might be a blessing in disguise. You've been trying so hard for a baby, and now what?" I cut in, rage rising. "Now I should be happy that my sister and husband betrayed me? That the baby I've been praying for will be born to the two people who hurt me most? That's not fair," she whined. "We didn't plan this. It just happened." "Affairs don't just happen, Allison. Neither do pregnancies. You both made choices repeatedly, knowing exactly who you would hurt." Her tone shifted to defensive. "Well, I'm keeping the baby, and Brian and I need to figure things out. He's the father, Sam. He has responsibilities now." I hung up and immediately blocked her number, then threw my phone across the room for good measure. The audacity, The utter selfishness of them both was breathtaking. In my distress, I made what would prove to be a naive mistake. I called my parents, expecting support, comfort, maybe even righteous anger on my behalf. After all, surely this transgression was too severe for even their Allison-colored glasses to excuse. I should have known better. Samantha, you need to calm down, my father said, after I poured out the whole story through tears. Coming unglued won't solve anything. Unglued? Dad, my husband and sister have been having an affair. She's pregnant with his baby. My mother's voice joined the call. We know, honey. Allison called us first. She's very upset too. She's upset? I nearly screamed. This situation is complicated, my mother continued. Everyone's hurting right now, but we need to be practical. Allison is going to have a baby, your niece or nephew. We need to think about what's best for the child. What followed was a conversation so surreal it might have been comical if it weren't destroying my life. My parents suggested that we all needed to find a path forward as a family, that while Brian had made a serious mistake, we should consider marriage counseling rather than making hasty decisions about divorce. And what about Allison? I asked. What are the consequences for her role in this mistake? My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Allison will have plenty of consequences to deal with as a single mother. She'll need our support, not our judgment. She won't be a single mother if you're pushing me to forgive Brian, I pointed out. The brief silence told me they hadn't thought that far ahead, or worse, they had, but didn't want to say it aloud. Sweetheart, my mother finally said, family is everything. Sometimes we have to forgive the unforgivable to preserve what matters most. It became clear then. They expected me to be the bigger person, to swallow my pain and dignity for the sake of family harmony, their definition of family, which somehow always required me to sacrifice while Allison took what she wanted. I ended the call and sat in the dark of my living room until morning, feeling completely alone. The next day, I called Jessica, my best friend since college, who immediately invited me to stay with her. As I packed some essential belongings, I realized I was leaving much more than a house. I was leaving the life I had built, the future I had planned, and the false security of a family that had never truly had my back. A week after moving into Jessica's spare bedroom, I received a text from my father. Family meeting. Sunday at 2. Our house. Important to discuss next steps. Jessica advised against going. They've shown you who they are, she said over wine the night before the meeting. Why subject yourself to more gaslighting? I need to face them, I replied. Otherwise, they control the narrative completely. The scene in my parents' living room that Sunday was like a twisted parody of family gatherings. My mother had prepared finger sandwiches and coffee, as if we were having a casual social call. My father sat in his usual armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing what appeared to be notes. Brian occupied the far end of the sofa, eyes downcast, while Allison, noticeably pregnant now at 4 months, sat beside him, her hand occasionally brushing against his knee. I took the chair furthest from them all, declining refreshments. Let's get this over with. My father cleared his throat. We've given this situation a lot of thought, and we believe we've found a solution that will work for everyone while avoiding unnecessary scandal. The solution, as it turned out, was breathtakingly self-serving. Brian would move in with Allison temporarily for appearance's sake, while our divorce proceeded quietly. Once finalized, they could make their relationship public, presenting it as something that developed after our marriage ended. The timeline of the pregnancy would be fudged slightly to support this narrative. The community doesn't need to know our private business, my mother explained. This way, everyone saves face. Everyone except me, I pointed out. I'm supposed to pretend my marriage simply didn't work out, then watch my sister and ex-husband play happy family with their new baby? You'd rather air all our dirty laundry? My father countered. Have people gossiping about you, pitying you? This protects you too, Samantha. It protects your reputation, I corrected. You're not worried about me, you're worried what the country club crowd will think if they knew the truth. Allison spoke up then, her voice carrying that familiar entitled tone. I think I'm being very reasonable here, Sam. I could make things much messier if I wanted to. How exactly could you make sleeping with my husband and getting pregnant messier, Allison? I asked coldly. She had the audacity to look offended. By fighting you on the divorce terms. For one thing, Brian will be paying child support, which affects the financial settlement. I looked at Brian, who had the decency to appear uncomfortable but remained silent. Do you have anything to say? He cleared his throat. I know I've hurt you terribly, Sam. But this arrangement makes sense for everyone, especially the baby. I hope someday you can forgive us both. The discussion continued for another hour, with my parents presenting their plan as the only sensible option. Allison making occasional self-serving comments about moving forward positively, and Brian mostly staring at the carpet. I said little, observing this coordinated performance with growing detachment. By the meeting's end, it was clear they had already decided everything without me. Brian had already moved most of his things to Allison's new apartment, which my parents had helped secure and furnish. The divorce papers were already drafted according to terms they had collectively deemed fair. My role was simply to comply and maintain the fiction they had created. There's one more thing, my mother said as I was leaving. We expect everyone to behave civilly at family functions, holidays, birthdays, and so on. You can't be serious, I said. Of course we are, my father replied. You're still family, regardless of what's happened. Allison nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And once the baby comes, you'll be her aunt. Family is family. The following months unfolded according to their script. Brian moved in with Allison. Divorce papers were filed, citing irreconcilable differences. My parents told relatives and friends that Brian and I had simply grown apart, a sad but common story. When questions arose about Allison and Brian's sudden closeness, vague explanations were offered about them finding comfort in their shared concern for me. Meanwhile, I struggled to maintain normalcy at work while processing my trauma. Some days, standing before my third-grade class teaching fractions felt like an out-of-body experience. Other days, the routine and innocent enthusiasm of my students provided my only relief from the chaos. Jessica became my rock, her apartment my sanctuary. You need to cut them all off, she would say regularly. They're toxic, every last one of them. But despite everything, completely severing ties with my family felt impossible. 3 decades of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight, no matter how justified the break might be. Each time I considered going no contact, a lifetime of family-first messaging would surface, along with the insidious fear that maybe I was overreacting, that I should be more forgiving, more understanding the bigger person, as always. This internal conflict reached its peak when the invitation arrived. A pale pink envelope with silver script announcing Allison's baby shower, to be held at my parents' home the following month. You cannot be serious, Jessica said, watching me stare at the invitation. They're actually expecting you to attend a party celebrating their betrayal? Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. Your presence would mean so much to Allison. Please consider coming to support your sister during this special time. I called my mother that evening, barely containing my fury. A baby shower invitation? Really? Samantha, I know this is difficult, she began, her voice carrying that placating tone I'd heard all my life. But consider the bigger picture. This baby is still your niece or nephew, an innocent child who deserves to have their whole family surrounding them with love. That baby was conceived in betrayal, I reminded her, by my husband and sister. Former husband, she corrected gently. And yes, what happened was wrong. Nobody is denying that. But holding on to anger only hurts you in the end. Forgiveness is, if you say forgiveness is for the forgiver, I might scream, I interrupted. You've never held Allison accountable for anything in her entire life. Why start now? The conversation ended with my mother's tearful assertion that she just wanted her family to heal, and my cold response that perhaps some wounds aren't meant to. After hanging up, I sat with the invitation in my hands, contemplating what it represented. My family's complete dismissal of my pain, their unwavering protection of Allison, regardless of her actions, and their expectation that I would once again sacrifice my dignity and well-being for the sake of appearances. It was, I realized, the perfect encapsulation of our family dynamic, and possibly the perfect opportunity to finally change it. The baby shower invitation triggered something in me that 2 months of therapy had been trying to unearth: pure, unadulterated rage. Not just at Allison and Brian's betrayal, but at the lifetime of inequality, dismissal, and emotional manipulation that had led to this point. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had been gently guiding me toward recognizing these patterns. During our session the day after receiving the invitation, everything crystallized. "Tell me about a time before all this when you felt your family treated you and Allison differently," she prompted. I laughed humorlessly. Where should I start? My high school graduation party was a backyard barbecue. Allison's was a catered event with a hired DJ. When I got my teaching degree, my parents gave me a card. When Allison dropped out of community college to find herself, they funded her 6-month trip to Europe to gain perspective. And how did they explain these differences? They didn't have to. It was always implied that I was stronger, more self-sufficient, that Allison needed more support because she was sensitive and creative. I shook my head. Really, they just liked her better. Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly. "Samantha, what you're describing is a family system with rigid roles. You were assigned the role of the responsible one, while your sister was the special one. These roles become self-reinforcing over time. So I was set up to be the family doormat," I said bitterly. "I'd frame it differently. You were conditioned to believe your value came from sacrifice and accommodation, while your sister was taught her value came from being centered and catered to. Neither is a healthy role." The session continued with this pattern of revelation, each insight striking like lightning. How my parents had trained me to expect less. How I'd internalized the message that my needs were secondary. How I'd chosen a career in teaching, partly because it reinforced my identity as the supportive, nurturing one who put others first. And now they're expecting me to attend a baby shower for my sister and ex-husband's affair baby, I said, holding up the invitation I'd brought with me. To bring a gift and smile and pretend everything's fine for the sake of family harmony. "What would happen if you didn't?" Dr. Winters asked simply. The question stopped me short. What would happen? There would be disappointment, guilt-tripping, perhaps even anger. But what tangible power did they actually have over me now? I was financially independent. I had my career, my friends. The marriage I'd fought to preserve was already destroyed. What more could I lose? "They're expecting me to follow the script," I said slowly. "To be the bigger person, like always. And what do you want to do?" For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to truly consider what I wanted, separate from the expectations that had been placed on me since childhood. "I want them to face consequences," I said finally, my voice stronger. "I want to stop protecting people who never protected me." That evening, fueled by this new clarity, I met Jessica for drinks at our favorite bar. After filling her in on my therapy breakthrough, I showed her the shower invitation. "You know what you should do," Jessica said after her second martini. "Show up with divorce papers as your gift. Or hire one of those singing telegrams to announce that your sister is a homewrecker." I laughed, the tension of the day releasing slightly. Tempting, but I'm pretty sure public humiliation would just reinforce their narrative that I'm the unstable, unreasonable one. "Then don't go at all. Send a baby rattle filled with glitter that explodes when they open it." We continued like this, coming up with increasingly outlandish revenge scenarios, none of which I would actually execute. Still, the exercise was cathartic, allowing me to express the petty impulses I'd been suppressing in my effort to be mature and dignified through this ordeal. "Seriously, though," Jessica said as we walked home, "you don't owe them your presence. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's survival." I nodded, but something was still gnawing at me. Simply not attending felt too passive, too much like slinking away in defeat. The family narrative would continue unchanged. Poor, difficult Samantha, unable to move past her hurt feelings for the greater good. Allison would be centered and celebrated. My parents would maintain appearances, and I would remain the outsider, the problem. The next morning, I received a call from my mother, checking whether I'd be bringing a gift to the shower. "I haven't decided if I'm coming," I replied honestly. Her sigh was audible. "Samantha, I know it's hard, but this baby is still your niece or nephew. Don't punish an innocent child for adult mistakes." That phrase, "don't punish an innocent child," was the final straw. As if my absence from a prenatal celebration would somehow damage an unborn baby. As if my feelings were so trivial they should be sacrificed for a party. As if I were the one inflicting harm, rather than the person who had been harmed repeatedly. "I'll think about it," I said before ending the call, but I had already made my decision. I would attend the baby shower, not as the accommodating sister they expected, but as someone finally ready to reclaim her power. The question was, how to do it in a way that couldn't be dismissed or twisted against me. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities and implications. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and it would require careful preparation, perfect timing, and a level of calculation I'd never allowed myself before. For the first time in my life, I would refuse to be the bigger person. Instead, I would be the smarter one. Traditional revenge would have been easy and ultimately self-defeating. I could have caused a scene at the shower, exposed their betrayal publicly, or engaged in any number of destructive acts that would have provided momentary satisfaction but lasting consequences. Instead, I needed a strategy that would serve my long-term interests while making it impossible for my family to maintain their precious facade. My first step was research. Lots of research. I started with our family finances. My grandparents, my father's parents, had been moderately wealthy, owning several successful hardware stores across Massachusetts before their retirement and subsequent passing when I was in college. They had left substantial trusts for both Allison and me, with specific conditions. The funds would be released when we turned 35 or upon starting a family, whichever came first. At 32, I was still 3 years from accessing my portion based on age, but I realized with bitter irony that my divorce technically fulfilled the family change clause, as the trust defined it as marriage, divorce, or childbirth major life transitions that might necessitate financial support. Allison, at 28, was using her pregnancy to claim her portion early. According to my father's offhand comment during our family meeting, she and Brian were already making plans for using the money on a house down payment once the baby arrived. What they didn't know, what I myself had forgotten until I began digging through old documents, was that our grandparents had included a special provision in the trust. If either granddaughter accessed her funds early due to a family change, the other granddaughter would be granted immediate access as well, regardless of whether she met the conditions independently. The provision had been designed to prevent inequality between sisters, something our grandparents had been keen to avoid after witnessing dysfunction in their own family due to financial disparities. How tragically ironic that their well-intentioned safeguard would now serve as a key component in my plan. My next area of investigation was Brian's employment status. Though we were legally separated and heading for divorce, we still shared bank accounts and financial responsibilities until the settlement was finalized. Checking our joint account activity revealed something interesting. Brian's regular direct deposits from his marketing firm had stopped 6 weeks earlier. A quick LinkedIn search confirmed my suspicion. Brian was no longer employed at North Star Marketing. His profile listed him as seeking new opportunities. He had lost or quit his job and hadn't told me, likely because it would affect our divorce settlement and his ability to support Allison and the baby. Further digging into our accounts showed he had been making withdrawals from our joint savings money we had set aside for fertility treatments and, eventually, a child of our own. The same money that would now presumably support his child with my sister. The third crucial piece came from Jessica, who worked at the same elementary school as me. Her classroom was next to Diane Winters, not my therapist, Dr. Winters, but a fifth-grade teacher who happened to be married to Brian's former boss at North Star Marketing. "I didn't want to add to your pain," Jessica admitted when I asked her about Brian's employment. "But since you're asking directly, he was fired for inappropriate workplace behavior. Apparently, he was using company resources to arrange meetings with Allison, calling in sick when he wasn't, that sort of thing. Tom Winters found out and gave him multiple warnings before finally letting him go. This information was gold, not just for my peace of mind, but for the divorce proceedings. Brian's termination for cause related to his affair would significantly impact how a judge viewed our settlement, especially his claim to substantial alimony based on his support during my teaching career. Armed with this knowledge, I consulted with attorney Miranda Chen, who specialized in complex divorces and family trust issues. After reviewing my case, she confirmed what I had begun to suspect. I had far more leverage than my family realized. Your grandparents created an unusually thoughtful trust, she observed, reviewing the documents. The reciprocal access provision is binding. If your sister claims her portion due to pregnancy, you're entitled to your full portion immediately as well. And the divorce? I asked. Given the circumstances, infidelity with your sister, resulting in pregnancy, followed by job termination related to the affair, we have an extremely strong case for a favorable settlement. The fact that he's been withdrawing from joint savings while concealing his employment status further strengthens our position. We spent 3 hours developing a comprehensive strategy. By the end, I had a clear path forward that would protect my financial interests, fast-track the divorce on favorable terms, and most importantly, reclaim my narrative. The key would be timing. The baby shower presented the perfect opportunity to unveil everything at once, with witnesses present who weren't part of the immediate family's conspiracy of silence. Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared meticulously. Miranda helped me draft and file the necessary legal documents. I gathered evidence, including bank statements, trust paperwork, and written statements from colleagues who had witnessed Brian's inappropriate workplace behavior. I even secured a statement from Tom Winters confirming the reasons for Brian's termination. I also took a significant step toward my independent future. Using my soon-to-be accessible trust funds, I made an offer on a small Victorian house near my school, a home I had always admired, but never thought I could afford on my teacher's salary. The offer was accepted, with closing scheduled for the week after the shower. Jessica helped me prepare emotionally as well, role-playing potential scenarios and reactions. They're going to try to make you look like the villain, she warned. Be ready for tears. Accusations of cruelty. Claims you're jealous or bitter. I know, I replied. But for once, I don't care what they think. This isn't about revenge, it's about consequences and closure. The night before the shower, I laid out my outfit. A simple but elegant navy blue dress, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and the most confidence-inspiring red lipstick I owned. I packed the crucial documents into a plain white gift box, tied with a silver ribbon. As I prepared for bed, I felt none of the anxiety or doubt that had plagued me throughout this ordeal. Instead, I experienced something entirely new, the calm certainty of someone who has finally stopped playing a rigged game and decided to flip the table instead. The day of the shower dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring Sunday. I arrived exactly 15 minutes late, not enough to cause a stir, but sufficient to ensure most guests would be present when I entered. My mother's house looked like a Pinterest board come to life. Pastel balloons tied to the mailbox, a welcome baby banner across the front door, and through the windows, I could see the living and dining rooms transformed with flowers, streamers, and an elaborate dessert table. The driveway and street were lined with cars. It seemed my parents had invited their entire social circle to witness Allison's joy. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door, gift box in hand, and rang the bell rather than using my key. My mother answered, momentary surprise flickering across her face before she composed herself. "Samantha, you came." Her voice carried forced enthusiasm as she hugged me stiffly. "Everyone will be so pleased." The everyone in question certainly didn't include Allison, whose smile faltered when she spotted me entering the living room. She sat in a decorated chair, essentially a throne, her 7-month pregnant belly prominently displayed in a fitted floral dress. Brian stood nearby, looking uncomfortable in a blue button-down shirt that I recognized as one I had bought him last Christmas. "Sam," he said, taking a half-step toward me before thinking better of it. "Brian," I replied coolly, then nodded to my sister. "Allison." The room had quieted at my entrance. The 20 or so guests, watching our interaction with barely disguised curiosity. I recognized most of them: my mother's book club friends, a few relatives, neighbors, and several of Allison's rotating circle of friends who changed with her frequent career shifts. "So glad you could make it," Allison said, her tone suggesting the opposite. My father approached, drink in hand. "Good to see you, kiddo. There's punch and appetizers in the dining room." I declined refreshments and took a seat at the periphery of the gathering, placing my gift box on the growing pile of presents. For the next hour, I observed the proceedings with detached interest. The ridiculous baby, themed games, the excessive compliments about Allison's pregnancy glow, the carefully curated story my parents told about how excited they were for their first grandchild. Not once did anyone acknowledge the circumstances of the pregnancy or express concern about my feelings. Finally, the moment arrived for opening gifts. My mother directed Allison back to her throne, while Brian sat beside her to help unwrap and display each item. A parade of predictable baby paraphernalia followed. Onesies, blankets, toys, and equipment, each met with exaggerated coos and thanks. My gift, by design, had ended up at the bottom of the pile. When Allison finally reached for the white box with silver ribbon, I stood and moved closer to the center of the room. "Before you open that," I said clearly, causing heads to turn, "I want to say something." My mother looked alarmed. "Samantha, perhaps this isn't the—" "It's exactly the time," I interrupted firmly. "Please, Allison, open it first, then I'll speak." Allison glanced at our parents, then cautiously untied the ribbon and removed the lid. Inside was a folder containing several neatly organized documents, each with a colored tab for easy identification. "What is this?" she asked, confusion evident as she lifted the folder. "Those are copies of some important papers I thought everyone should be aware of," I explained, my voice steady. "The originals have already been filed with the appropriate authorities and institutions." Brian leaned over to look at the contents, his expression shifting from puzzlement to alarm as he began to understand what he was seeing. "Perhaps we should look at these in private," my father suggested, starting to rise from his seat. "No," I said firmly. "There's been enough privacy and secrecy in this family. Let me explain what Allison and Brian are holding." I turned to address the entire room, aware that every guest was now watching with rapt attention. "The first document is notification of my claim to my portion of our grandparents' trust fund. As some of you may know, Allison is using her pregnancy to access her inheritance early. What she didn't realize is that our grandparents included a provision that if one sister claims their portion early due to a family change, the other sister is automatically granted the same right." Murmurs rippled through the room as my parents exchanged alarmed glances. "The second document is evidence that Brian lost his job at North Star Marketing 6 weeks ago, terminated for cause related to his affair with my sister. He's been lying to everyone, including the divorce court, about his employment status while secretly withdrawing money from our joint savings." Brian's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "This is inappropriate, Samantha." "Inappropriate?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. An interesting choice of word from a man who slept with his wife's sister. Someone in the back of the room gasped audibly. "The third document is a revised divorce settlement that my attorney has prepared based on this new information. It significantly reduces any claim Brian might have had to alimony or division of assets, given his misconduct and deception." I paused to let this sink in before continuing. "The fourth item is proof of purchase for my new home, a lovely Victorian near my school that I've bought using my portion of the trust. I close next week and will be moving immediately thereafter." Allison finally found her voice. "You're trying to ruin our baby shower out of spite," she accused, tears welling in her eyes. "After everything we've done to include you—" "Include me?" I cut her off. "You slept with my husband, got pregnant while I was undergoing fertility treatments, and then expected me to smile and celebrate as if you'd done nothing wrong. That's not inclusion, Allison. That's cruelty, masked as family loyalty." I turned to face our parents, who sat frozen with mortification as their carefully constructed facade crumbled before their social circle. "For years, you've taught me that family means sacrificing my needs, my feelings, even my dignity for Allison's benefit. You covered up her betrayal, facilitated her relationship with my husband, and then had the audacity to demand I play along for appearance's sake. Today, I'm declining that role. My mother stood, trying to salvage the situation. Samantha is understandably emotional about her divorce, she told the guests with a strained smile. Perhaps we should take a short break. No more breaks, Mom. No more pretending. I addressed the room again. The story you've all been told about my amicable separation from Brian was a lie created to hide the fact that he and Allison began an affair during my fertility treatments, resulting in this pregnancy. My parents knew the truth and chose to protect them rather than support me. The silence in the room was deafening. Several guests looked profoundly uncomfortable, while others seemed oddly vindicated, as if they'd suspected something wasn't right with the official story all along. I'm not here to create a scene, I continued, my voice softening slightly. I simply refuse to participate in one more family event based on lies. The papers in that folder ensure that I can finally move forward with my life on my own terms without further manipulation or gaslighting. I picked up my purse and turned to leave, then paused for one final thought. Oh, and Allison? The last document in the folder is the name of my attorney, who you'll need to contact regarding visitation with my niece or nephew. Despite everything, I do intend to be part of that child's life just on my terms, not yours. With that, I walked out, closing the front door behind me on the stunned silence. In my car, I finally released the breath I'd been holding and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the fragile peace of avoidance or the forced peace of compliance, but the genuine peace that comes from standing in your truth, regardless of the consequences. As I drove away from my childhood home, I knew the chaos I'd left behind would soon erupt into accusations, damage control, and possibly even some long overdue accountability. But for the first time since discovering the affair, those reactions were no longer my responsibility or concern. The perfect revenge hadn't been causing pain or public humiliation. It had been reclaiming my narrative and ensuring that the truth, however uncomfortable, could no longer be brushed aside for the sake of appearances. 6 months after the baby shower confrontation, I stood in the bay window of my Victorian home, coffee mug in hand, watching autumn leaves dance across my front yard. The morning light caught the stained glass accents, casting prismatic patterns across the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself over the summer. This house had become more than just a place to live. It was tangible proof of my independence and new beginning. Each room I'd painted, each repair I'd learned to make, represented another step in rebuilding my life on my terms. Jessica sat at my kitchen island, scrolling through apartment listings on her laptop. After years in the same rental, she was finally looking to buy a place of her own, inspired by what she called my glorious rise from the ashes. "What about this one?" she asked, turning the screen toward me. "It's in your neighborhood, walking distance to school." I studied the modest Cape Cod with the bright red door. "Looks promising. The inspection will be key, though these older homes can hide expensive surprises." "Listen to you, sounding all HGTV," she laughed. "6 months ago, you didn't know a Phillips head from a flathead screwdriver." "Amazing what you can learn when necessity and YouTube collide," I replied, joining her at the island. "But seriously, having a friend nearby would be wonderful. This neighborhood has become my sanctuary." Indeed, the aftermath of the baby shower had necessitated creating strong boundaries and new support systems. As expected, my parents had immediately tried damage control, calling repeatedly with a mixture of anger and tearful pleas about family healing. Allison had vacillated between rage-filled accusations and manipulative attempts at reconciliation, especially as her due date approached. I maintained minimal contact, engaging only through my attorney when necessary regarding the divorce and trust disbursement. The legal proceedings had concluded largely in my favor, with Brian receiving far less than he'd initially demanded due to his documented misconduct and financial deception. More surprisingly, the exposure of the truth had unexpected ripple effects within our extended family and social circle. My mother's cousin Janet, whom I'd always liked but rarely saw, reached out with a supportive message. I witnessed something similar in our family 30 years ago. I admire your courage in breaking the cycle. That initial contact led to regular lunch dates and a rediscovered connection with Janet's branch of the family people who operated with a refreshing directness and genuine warmth that had been missing from my immediate family dynamic. Professionally, I'd found new purpose as well. My principal had offered me the opportunity to become head teacher for our grade level, recognizing the organizational skills and resilience I'd demonstrated even during personal turmoil. The promotion came with a modest raise and the chance to mentor newer teachers, work that I found unexpectedly fulfilling. Have you heard anything more about the baby? Jessica asked, interrupting my reflections. Actually, yes. Janet visited yesterday and showed me pictures. Amelia Rose was born 3 weeks ago, a little early but healthy. Allison had given birth to a daughter in late September. Despite my sister's attempts to exclude me from any involvement, Janet had maintained contact with my parents and provided updates and photos. How do you feel about being an aunt? Jessica asked carefully, watching my expression. I considered the question complicated. I still plan to be part of her life eventually, but only once clear boundaries are established. A baby deserves to be surrounded by healthy relationships, not toxic ones. I won't participate in the dysfunction that would teach her the same patterns I had to unlearn. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had been instrumental in helping me navigate these complex emotions. The natural love for a new family member, colliding with the painful circumstances of her conception, and the ongoing issues with her parents. We'd worked through strategies for future interactions that would allow me to be present for Amelia while protecting my own emotional health. Speaking of relationships, Jessica said with a sly smile, how was your date with Michael last night? I felt my cheeks warm slightly. Michael Kennedy was a science teacher at a neighboring school whom I'd met during a district professional development day. Our connection had been immediate but gentle, an easy conversation over lunch that led to coffee, then dinner, and now several enjoyable evenings together over the past month. It was really nice, I admitted. We went to that new jazz club downtown, then walked along the riverfront talking until midnight. He's thoughtful and funny, and there's no rush or pressure, just genuine interest in getting to know each other. What I didn't add was how refreshing it felt to be with someone who saw me clearly from the beginning, not as an extension of family expectations or a supporting character in someone else's story, but as a complete person with my own dreams and boundaries. When I'd briefly mentioned my family situation on our second date, Michael's response had been perfect. Simple acknowledgement of how difficult it must have been, followed by attentive listening without judgment or platitudes. He'd shared some of his own family complexities as well, a father who'd struggled with addiction, a sister with whom he maintained careful boundaries, creating space for mutual understanding rather than one-sided exposure. Earth to Sam, Jessica waved her hand in front of my face, breaking my reverie. You went full daydream mode there. He must be something special. I smiled. I'm just enjoying the process of getting to know someone in a healthy way. Whether it becomes something long-term or not, it feels good to trust my judgment again. My phone chimed with a text message. Glancing at the screen, I saw it was from my father. Your mother and I would like to speak with you. Important family matter. Please call when you can. Jessica noticed my expression change. Parents again? I nodded, showing her the message. That makes 3 this week. Usually, it means they want something, or there's a new crisis with Allison. Since the confrontation, my parents had made sporadic attempts at reconciliation, though always on their terms. They'd never acknowledged their role in enabling the affair or apologized for pressuring me to maintain appearances afterward. Instead, they framed the situation as an unfortunate family rift that everyone needed to move past for Amelia's sake. Are you going to call them back? Jessica asked. Not today, I decided, putting the phone away. Whatever it is can wait until my next therapy session. I'm getting better at not responding to their emergencies as if they're my responsibility. That afternoon, after Jessica left, I worked in my small backyard garden, planting bulbs that would bloom in spring, a literal and symbolic investment in future growth. The physical activity helped clear my mind, grounding me in the present rather than ruminating on the past. Later, as evening approached, I set up my easel near the bay window. Painting was a hobby I'd abandoned years ago when marriage, work, and fertility treatments had consumed my time and energy. Reclaiming it had been another small act of self-recovery. As I mixed colors for the sunset landscape I was creating, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain hadn't disappeared. Betrayal of that magnitude leaves permanent marks, but its power over my daily life had diminished significantly. Where once there had been all-consuming grief and rage, now there was primarily peace, punctuated by occasional moments of sadness or anger that I could acknowledge without being overwhelmed. The most valuable lesson hadn't been about revenge or even justice, but about reclaiming authorship of my own story. For too long, I'd allowed others to define my role, my worth, and my options. The baby shower confrontation hadn't just been about exposing truth to others, it had been about finally accepting it myself, that I deserved better than what my family had offered, that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, and that sometimes the family we create for ourselves is healthier than the one we're born into. My phone rang, interrupting these thoughts. It was Michael, calling to thank me for last night and ask about plans for the weekend. As we talked easily about possibilities, a hiking trail he knew, a farmer's market I'd been wanting to visit, I felt a gentle happiness that once seemed impossibly distant. Life would continue to have complications. Eventually, I would need to determine what relationship, if any, I wanted with my parents. I would need to establish boundaries around involvement with my niece. I would face new challenges and old wounds as life unfolded. But for the first time, I faced these prospects with confidence rather than dread, secure in the knowledge that I was capable of making choices that honored my own well-being rather than sacrificing it for false harmony. The perfect revenge, it turned out, wasn't found in the dramatic confrontation at the baby shower, satisfying though that had been. The real victory was in every day that followed. Each morning I woke in a home that was truly mine. Each boundary I maintained without guilt. Each new relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The best revenge was simply living well, on my own terms, one authentic choice at a time. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to prioritize your own well-being over family expectations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like this video if you found my journey inspiring and subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's challenges. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.